Welcome to our Facebook live chat, Debunking Clinical Trial Myths in honor of Clinical Trial Awareness Day. My name is Alyssa Ames, and I am a clinical trials ambassador with the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. Every year on May 20th, we recognize Clinical Trials Awareness Day to commemorate the anniversary of the first randomized clinical trial. Clinical trials investigate the effects of a medication or other medical therapy. Clinical trials are a key part of research to not only find cures, but to better understand IBD and to develop and test new treatment options. During today's chat, we invite you to learn more about participating in a clinical trial or study as an IBD patient. I am joined by Chad Rypstra, a clinical research coordinator at the Mayo Clinic Division of Gastroenterology and Hepatology. Chad will help us debunk some common misconceptions about clinical trials and provide more information about what it's like to participate in a clinical trial. Welcome, Chad.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you for letting me be here. Happy to talk with you about this.
Before we get started, let's go over a few quick pieces of housekeeping. Today's chat is meant for educational purposes only, and the views shared during this chat are not meant to represent the official position of the foundation. Always consult with your provider before making changes to your IBD treatment regimen. If you have any questions about clinical trials that we do not get to today, you can visit our clinical trials community at crohnscolitisfoundation.org/clinical-trials-community or contact our IBD Help Center by emailing info@crohnsandcolitisfoundation.org or by calling 1-888-MY-GUT-PAIN to get your question answered. With that, let's get started. So I have some myths that I wanted to talk through with you of things that might come up. So number one, people who sign up to participate in clinical trials are guinea pigs.
That is a very good one, and I've heard that one before. There are many different stages to many different clinical trials. If we're talking about a drug or an interventional therapy, before anything is put to test in a human, many begin with lab or animal testing so that researchers can start to understand the safety and the mechanism of the drug or the therapy. The next stages or phases of a study will incorporate the testing for the safety and the effectiveness of a drug or intervention. But of course, this is all done before informing the patients through this process called informed consent. Where a member of the research team, usually a coordinator, but it could be the investigator or the lead researcher of the trial or the study, you inform the patients of all the risks, the benefits, and with the ongoing option to be able to withdraw from the trial or study at any time, and which also doesn't jeopardize any of their clinical care. So with the guinea pig aspect of it, guinea pigs really don't have an option to leave. And with humans, there is always the option to leave.
Great. Another thing that I've heard is that clinical trials only use placebos or sugar pills.
So not all clinical trials use drugs. So there can't always be placebos or there could be placebos, but not sugar pills. Placebo is kind of can be a broad term too, as where you're comparing. In a trial, you're either using the intervention or the drug, or you're not. So it's not always just a sugar pill while in a trial. But there are also trial designs that use different doses of a drug or different schedules, routes of administration. But for example, some trials could use just a higher dose, and the other arm of the study may use a lower dose of the drug. So it's not always a sugar pill or a placebo either. It also depends on the phase of the study. It's the rationale for using a placebo, though, is that researchers can compare the groups, those who received a study drug or intervention, those who didn't, and prove that it's statistically significantly more effective than placebo, so that regulatory bodies can approve for clinical patient use. Some of those like institutional review boards and the FDA groups like that. But there's also studies that don't even use a placebo or a drug. Some follow your clinical care, and there's no interventions, but rather collecting data, whether it's from clinical notes or surveys, or just asking to gather samples, maybe a blood draw or other samples. So that's placebos or sugar pills are not in every single trial or study.
Got it. Here's another concern that people might have. Clinical trials are dangerous because they use new practices or medications.
So clinical trials all have risks. Some risks are greater than others, but again, this is all explained in the informed consent process, and some of the risks are gone over, all of the risks are gone in great detail prior to anyone joining the study. But they aren't all dangerous. Some of the risks are the same if you get a blood draw. It's the same risk as if you just went in because your doctor wanted to test your blood. It's the same kind of risk. Maybe you have some bruising or a little pain from getting the needle. Again, everything is gone over prior to even joining. So the participant or prospective participant gets to decide whether those risks are something they're willing to take on. Of course, those risks are all gone over through an internal review process prior to even allowing the study to be active and be able to recruit for that. So the institutional review board is a mandated regulatory body within each institution that reviews all of those risks. If it's a trial using a new device or a brand new drug, or even a drug that's already on market, but it's going to, they're trying to get it, researchers are trying to allow it to be used for a different indication. The FDA has to approve the use of that in order to protect the participants from any unreasonable risks. So trials aren't all dangerous. The only way that a trial can be allowed to be available again is to assume that all of the risks are reasonable for the patients.
Got it. And then how about kids? I've heard that children are not allowed to participate in clinical trials.
That's not true. So children are allowed to participate in clinical trials, but usually this is only after adults have gone through all the clinical trial phases. Kind of an example would be the COVID vaccines. They were approved for use in adults first, and then the drug companies had to submit for approval for use in children from age 12 to 17, and then for children from ages 5 through 11. So that safety had to be established for adults first. There are some trials that are aimed specifically at children, and then there, because of the approval for the usage with an intervention or a drug with adults. But then there are some broad studies that may also include children for just the data collection aspect of it. So children are allowed to participate, but the informed consent process is a little bit different for them. Obviously, if you're going to go through all these substantial risks, you may not be able to assume that a 5-year-old is going to be able to understand all those. So a child may provide their assent after, of course, having permission to speak with them, with a parent or legal guardian present. And of an abridged version where a member of the research team engages their ability to comprehend. Maybe it's just a minute or two and just kind of describing the basics of the study and see if the child wants to, and then go over the entire consent process with the parent or guardian, making sure that they agree with all the potential risks and benefits as well.
Awesome. So for our fifth myth, Clinical trials are only an option for me when I have exhausted all of my other options as a last resort.
Yes. Okay. So many times in clinical trials, part of the inclusion and exclusion criteria. So in order to be able to participate, there's certain criteria that have to be met based on the medical history and many other things. Many of them, especially for a drug trial, require that you have failed some of the currently available therapies. The rationale is that the regulatory bodies like IRBs and FDA want patients to have tried therapies that are already on market, and they have a lot of information about the safety and effectiveness of those existing drugs. So it's not that a patient may have failed all possible options, but there are some already established clinical paths that do want patients to go through first. Of course, this is in their best interest, in the patient's best interest for their health and their safety. It's not always the case because you could just have a pre-existing where you have already gone through all the options and the trial is just presenting itself at that point. But always make sure that you're consulting with your provider before joining in any clinical trial.
Got it. And speaking of my provider, if I join a clinical trial, I'm worried that I won't receive the same care from my current doctor.
So being a research participant, you get to receive even more collaborative care because you have your provider as well as your research team, an investigator there, maybe some research nurses, of course, research coordinators. There's a lot more people involved in your care. And when in the trial, there's gonna be a lot of safety time points and checks where you're coming in, maybe just over simple physical or reviews of your labs. We get safety lab work done every couple of weeks. So the quality of your care will at least remain the same, but you're probably going to have more greater involved care while you're in a trial. It's just all those, so many more time points. And of course, we always want to check with the provider. You know, if a participant is going to join in a trial, we want to make sure that the medications that maybe they currently are on aren't going to have an effect on the trial drug, and make sure that plan of care is okay with the provider as well.
Yeah, I would say that was my experience, was better and more encompassing care. Yeah. The next myth I want to talk about is that once I decide to participate in a clinical trial, I won't be able to change my mind.
You can change your mind anytime you want to. That's established right from the get-go. If you, I mean, you, of course, you don't ever even have to join the trial if you don't want to. You're never obligated to do that. And at any time point, whether it's 5 minutes after you sign consent form, midway through the trial, you're just not feeling good, not feeling right, or you're nearing the end and you're like, I just can't finish this, and never feel guilt at all. Just if you need to go, make sure you contact somebody on the research team. You get a copy of the informed consent form after signing it, and on there is contact information. Most people are also available via email or just phone calls. They just never hesitate to contact and talk to anybody on the team. And you can be withdrawn from the study without jeopardizing anything. None of your clinical care would be jeopardized. Team member is going to look poorly down on you, and in fact, probably be more positive, like, I'm glad you stood up for yourself, and you would always be open to joining another trial at some point if it ever came up for you. So you can change your mind whenever you want to.
Okay, that's great to know. And then I feel like if there was a clinical trial that could help me, my doctor would have already told me about it.
There are so many clinical trials and studies out there. It would be impossible for your provider to know every single one that's out there, even for a specific disease. There's, I don't know, thousands of clinical trials out there happening at any given time in the United States. So even though your doctor, maybe, they know a lot, they're extremely knowledgeable, they may not have information about all the trial options. in the United States, much less in your region. Also, some providers don't participate in research. So therefore, they're not going to know all the trial options. There is an awesome place. A lot of institutions have trials posted on their own institution websites, but also there's one called clinicaltrials.gov. Obviously a government, it's a federal website, but anyone can access trial information and contact information. So you can look up your disease, look up maybe a doctor you know of and have heard of that works with your particular disease, and you can access any kind of trials that are involved with that. So your doctor may or may not know one that could help you, but it's a great point and place to be involved in your care as well. And if you find something, bring it up to your doctor as well and see if that would be a good fit for you.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind. Another thing I'm worried about is that I might have to pay to be in a clinical trial.
Every trial is different. Have to pay is a very broad term, and I'll explain that in a little bit. The clinical trial sponsor, if it's a clinical trial using a drug, using an intervention, usually pays for all the research-related costs and any special testing. Some of the trial study activities incorporate like your normal standard of care, something you would be getting anyway without being in a trial, something that's been ordered by your physician. And some trial activities piggyback on that. Like for example, if you're eligible for part of the inclusion criteria, or that you patient maybe needed to be currently hospitalized, trials most likely not going to be paying for that hospitalization because that was already a clinical indication. But the interventions or the drugs that were that you would agree to participate with would be covered by the sponsor. But of course, that is all also explained in the informed consent process. So you would be completely informed before you decided if you wanted to participate or not. But also, some trials do give participants money. It's called remuneration, which is a set dollar amount for participants' time or effort in the study. Some trials may give a set dollar amount for travel expenses too. Again, that's all in the informed consent process.
Good to know. So I'm feeling a lot better about a clinical trial, but one last thing that I'm thinking about is that my participation in a clinical trial doesn't really make a difference.
If there are no participants, we wouldn't have clinical trials. So it's extremely important, and it makes a huge difference for research and for future clinical care. When you talked about placebos, even patients that get randomized to a placebo arm are providing extremely valuable information and data for the sake of research, and just potentially helping patients in the future. Without participants, new medications can't be approved by the FDA and then can't reach the patients. A clinical trial type process, it takes years before it becomes open for enrollment. But the whole process takes several years. And if a treatment isn't effective for a patient, it may feel like you're only just paying it forward. But in addition to helping the research and accessing potential treatments maybe you wouldn't have had access to, and accessing them before they get to market, participants also receive quality and extremely personalized care during the trial, and they learn a lot more about whatever condition or disease they may have.
Great,
so
thank you.
Keep participating.
Thanks for all of that information. That is all the time we have for today's chat. Thank you, Chad, for taking the time to help us debunk some myths about clinical trials.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for talking with me.
To learn more about IBD clinical trials, you can visit the clinical trials community at crohnscolitisfoundation.org/clinical-trials-community. Thank you to the supporters of the clinical trials community, which you can also find listed on our website. If you enjoyed this session, we hope that you will consider sharing a recording of this chat, which will be available on our Facebook page and YouTube channel with other members of the IBD community. As a reminder, our IBD Help Center is available to answer any questions you may have after today's chat. You can contact our IBD Help Center by emailing info@crohnscolitisfoundation.org or by calling 1-888-MY-GUT-PAIN. Thank you and take care.
Thanks, Alyssa.